You've felt it, haven't you? That quiet weight that sits beneath your thoughts, behind your words, breathing through every silence you've tried to fill. There's something ancient about it, like a memory, older than memory, whispering from the spaces between moments. You try to name it, but the moment you do, it disappears. It isn't sadness nor peace. It's something that stands before both. Sometimes it comes when you wake at night and the world is still. Sometimes it visits in the middle of a crowd, when noise becomes meaningless and you feel strangely detached, as if life were a film you're both in and watching from afar. You think you're lonely, but it's not loneliness. You think you're tired, but it's not fatigue. It's something else that wants to speak through you, something your mind can't translate. You've been taught to fill silence with movement, with voices, with thoughts. But what if silence isn't absence? What if it's a living presence, waiting to reveal itself, when everything else stops fighting for attention? You've seen it before, perhaps in the reflection of a candle's flame, perhaps in the eyes of someone who no longer needs to speak. It's there, patient, eternal, and undisturbed by your search for meaning. And yet you resist it, because silence doesn't flatter the ego. It doesn't comfort. It mirrors you. It shows you the hollow shape of what you pretend to be and asks what lies beneath. The more you listen, the louder it becomes. The more you run, the deeper it follows. That's why it frightens you, because it knows you. But here's the paradox Jung discovered in the soul's depths, that silence is not your enemy. It's the voice of what you've hidden from yourself, the sound of your own becoming. When you stop trying to conquer it, it begins to guide you. It shows you the path back to the center. And perhaps that's why you're here now, sensing that something unseen is about to speak through the quiet. Not from above, but from within. And somewhere, in that still space where language breaks apart, you feel a pulse. A heartbeat beneath thought. A call that isn't made of words. Something wants to rise through the silence. It isn't coming to destroy you, but to remind you that you were never apart from it. You've just forgotten how to listen. When silence starts to speak, everything you thought you knew begins to dissolve. What's left isn't emptiness. It's truth. And tonight, that truth has been waiting for you to finally stop talking. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the soul's first language, the medium through which the unconscious breathes. Long before words, long before the mind began its endless chatter, there was only the quiet pulse of being. You came from that place. Every dream, every insight, every turning point in your life has been born from it. Yet, you have learned to fear it, to call it emptiness. The ego trembles in silence because it cannot find itself there. It dissolves like mist at dawn. When you close your eyes and listen beyond thought, you begin to sense something vast, watching through you. This is what Jung called the deeper psyche, the totality beyond the persona. You feel it not as a thought, but as a vibration moving through your chest, an awareness that does not need language. The forest of your mind begins to open, and you realize you have spent years lost among its branches, naming every tree, but never understanding the forest itself. Silence reveals the whole. There is an ancient intelligence in that quiet. It does not argue or explain. It mirrors. When you gaze into it, you see both the light and the shadow of what you are. The noise of the world trains you to hide from the shadow, but silence refuses to participate in the lie. It simply waits. It shows you the truth without judgment, the truth you have buried under ambition, under anxiety, under distraction. To meet it is to stand naked before your own soul. And in that meeting, something shifts. You begin to hear the faint hum of the self, the archetype of wholeness, calling from deep below consciousness. It does not demand obedience. It invites remembering. Silence becomes a temple where opposites unite. Noise and stillness, mind and heart, life and death. The boundary between you and the world begins to blur. You no longer listen to silence, you listen as silence. The more you surrender, the more it reveals. Every image in your dreams, every archetype that rises from the depths, every moment of déjà vu or intuition, they all emerge through this quiet space. It is the language of the unconscious, older than speech, the sound of life reflecting upon itself. Silence is the bridge between your finite mind and infinite meaning. When you stop trying to understand it, it begins to teach you, not through thought, but through presence. You start to see that what you called silence was never empty. It was pregnant with symbols, emotions, and the raw material of transformation. The alchemy of the soul begins there. Fire and water, light and darkness, masculine and feminine, all dissolve into stillness until something new is born. You start to sense that maybe silence is not what remains after everything else has gone. Maybe it is what has been speaking all along. And so the question emerges quietly. If silence is already speaking, then who is truly listening? That question will guide you through the next steps of this inner journey, where words begin to fall away and only understanding remains. There comes a moment when you can no longer escape the silence. You might be sitting in a dim room, the light soft, the air unmoving, and yet something vast presses against the edges of your awareness. It feels like a weight, but it is not heavy. It feels like waiting, but there is no impatience. It is as if life itself has paused to watch you. The heart slows. The noise of thought begins to thin out, and in that thinning, something ancient stirs. You try to listen, but listening itself becomes difficult because the mind wants to name what it hears. It wants to turn silence into sound, into meaning, into something that fits the language of control. Yet, silence does not bend to control. It reveals itself only to those who stop asking for proof. Jung would call this the beginning of descent, the first step into the underworld of the psyche. What you meet there is not darkness, but depth. It feels like falling. You sense yourself crossing a threshold that cannot be seen. The walls of identity soften. What once seemed solid now ripples like water. Every fear you have buried, every emotion you refuse to feel, begins to shimmer beneath the surface. Silence has no mercy because it has no preference. It shows all. It calls the shadow out of hiding. And in that calling, you realize that silence has never been outside of you. It has always lived inside, waiting for recognition. The shadow begins to speak, but not with words. It speaks through images that rise like smoke. You see a forgotten version of yourself, the one you silenced long ago. You see guilt, desire, tenderness, shame, all forming a chorus that was once buried beneath your busyness. Silence is not here to punish you. It is here to return your soul to its wholeness. It dissolves the distance between what you are and what you pretend to be. And as you stand in that stillness, trembling, you understand why most people never enter this space. Because it asks everything of you. It strips away illusion until there is nothing left but essence. Yet, in that nothingness, a quiet light appears. It is small, like a candle in a cave. You do not light it. It has always been burning. Silence only reveals it. And once you see that light, you begin to understand that what you feared was never the dark, but your own depth. You are not falling anymore. You are descending. There is a difference. Falling is blind. Descending is conscious. And the more you descend, the closer you come to the voice within the silence, the voice that has no sound, and yet carries all truth. It does not speak to be heard. It speaks to awaken. The descent continues, though it no longer feels like movement. It feels like stillness widening inside you. The walls that once held your sense of self begin to dissolve, and what replaces them is neither fear nor freedom, but vastness. You sense that the silence is alive. It breathes with you. It watches through your eyes. It feels your hesitation, yet it remains patient, like an ocean that knows every wave will return to it in time. You begin to realize that silence is not an absence of sound, but a field of consciousness itself. It listens before you listen. It knows before you know. Jung saw this as the domain of the self, the archetype that contains all opposites. In silence, your contradictions cease to fight. The warrior rests beside the child, the sinner beside the saint. You understand, perhaps for the first time, that the human soul was never meant to be one thing. It was meant to hold everything. Still, the ego resists. It does not want to vanish into something larger. It clings to its stories, to its small victories and wounds, because they give it shape. But the silence keeps widening. The stories begin to lose their power. Their edges blur. You remember the faces that once haunted you, the mistakes that once defined you, and you watch them dissolve into mist. The silence does not erase them. It absorbs them into meaning. A strange tenderness begins to rise. You feel it behind the ribs, gentle, yet infinite. It is the soul's way of remembering itself. You see how every pain was an unopened letter from the unconscious, how every loss was a doorway disguised as an ending. You begin to sense that silence has been speaking to you through every event of your life. Every coincidence, every dream, every moment of solitude has been part of its language. In the heart of that realization, the mind quiets completely. You are no longer seeking anything. The seeker and the sought dissolve into one awareness. You realize that silence was never waiting to be found. It was waiting for you to stop running. What remains is not emptiness, but presence. The silence begins to feel like love, though it is a love too vast to be owned. It holds you without asking. It sees you without judging. You exhale, and in that exhale, the world seems to breathe with you. You are not alone here. Everything you've ever known, every fragment of your being, has returned to this same still center. The silence does not speak in words, but its meaning is clear. There was never anything to fear in the depths. Only yourself waiting to be remembered. In the deep quiet that follows, you begin to notice how silence reshapes perception itself. Time loses its grip. The boundaries between moments soften, and every second feels eternal. You are not remembering or imagining. You are simply being, as if consciousness itself were breathing through you. The mind, which once filled the void with noise, now bows before the mystery. You are not trying to understand anymore. You are allowing understanding to unfold. This is where the unconscious begins to speak in symbols. A door appears, though it is not a physical one. It stands somewhere between sleep and waking, known and unknown. You do not open it, it opens you. Jung called this the threshold of individuation, the crossing into wholeness. Silence becomes the guardian of that gate, asking for no password, only surrender. You feel it in your body, a pull that comes not from desire, but from inevitability. Images begin to rise from the depths, not as visions to analyze, but as living presences. You see fire and water dancing together, not in conflict, but in communion. You see a forest where the trees whisper your name, reminding you that everything alive is a mirror. You see a river that flows both forward and backward, erasing the illusion of time. These are not hallucinations. They are memories of the soul. Silence gives them voice. As you walk through this inner landscape, something profound becomes clear. The silence you feared was never empty. It was full of life, waiting to be born. Every image, every symbol, every flicker of insight is part of a dialogue between your conscious self and the greater psyche. The conversation does not happen in words. It happens in recognition. You realize that you are not separate from the dream. You are the dreamer and the dream. The more you trust the silence, the more it reveals its rhythm. It moves through you like music without sound. It teaches you not through logic, but through resonance. You begin to feel that every heartbeat is an echo of something vast. Every breath is a bridge between worlds. You start to sense that the purpose of silence is not to remove life's noise, but to tune it into harmony. You stand now at the edge of understanding, not looking for meaning, but being shaped by it. The silence is no longer something you enter. It is something you have become. And as it flows through you, the distinction between inner and outer begins to fade. The forest, the river, the fire, the breath, all speak in the same language. And in that language, you begin to hear the truth. Silence was never meant to isolate you. It was meant to return you home. There is a turning that happens once silence becomes familiar. You no longer see it as something separate from life, but as its hidden rhythm. The same stillness that you find in meditation exists in the pause between your words, in the space between breaths, in the look that lingers before understanding. Silence begins to follow you, not as absence, but as presence. It walks beside you like an old friend who asks for nothing, yet gives everything. You start to notice how much of your life has been a reaction to noise. The constant striving, the endless search for validation, the desire to prove or to be seen. All of it was a way of avoiding silence. You confused motion with meaning, sound with truth. But now, as you let silence inhabit your days, you begin to sense how much more alive everything becomes. A leaf falling carries eternity. A single inhale feels sacred. The ordinary becomes luminous. This is the mystery Jung touched upon when he spoke of the union of opposites. The mind that once feared stillness now finds life within it. The heart that once sought passion in noise now finds it in quiet devotion. You realize that silence was never trying to erase you, but to integrate you. Every sound that emerges from it returns to it again. Every joy, every sorrow, every love, every loss. Nothing is outside the circle. At night, when you close your eyes, you begin to hear a new kind of silence. It is not empty. It is full of movement, full of breath, full of awareness. You sense that the universe itself is listening through you. Each dream becomes a continuation of that same quiet dialogue. The symbols speak. The shadows answer. And the self listens. There is no division anymore between what you call waking and dreaming. There is only continuity. And as you awaken in the morning, the silence remains. It greets you in the light through the window, in the steam of the first cup of coffee, in the stillness before the world begins to move. It feels sacred, but not distant. It feels human. You begin to live differently, not by escaping the world, but by listening to its silence. The more you listen, the more it speaks, and the more you realize that everything has been trying to tell you the same thing. You are not separate from the song. You are its echo, returning to its source. There comes a moment when silence begins to take form within you. It no longer feels like a visitor, but like the ground you walk on. Thoughts still appear. Emotions still rise and fall. Yet, none of them disturb the stillness beneath. You begin to understand that silence is not the absence of experience. It is the space that allows experience to exist. It is the background music of existence, the eternal note that never stops playing. You walk through the world differently now. Crowds no longer feel overwhelming. Conversations no longer drain you. Even conflict seems to soften in the presence of silence. You have discovered that peace is not found in escape, but in inclusion. You can listen to chaos without becoming it. You can watch pain without judging it. You can be surrounded by sound and still remain untouched inside. That is the alchemy of silence. In this state, reflection becomes revelation. You begin to see how every struggle in your life was a movement toward this understanding. The betrayals, the failures, the loneliness, each one a teacher disguised as loss. The silence behind them was never punishing you. It was preparing you to hear what cannot be spoken. It was waiting until the noise of identity grew tired enough to rest. And now that it has, truth becomes audible. You realize that silence has its own morality. It does not force forgiveness, but it invites it. It does not demand surrender, but it makes resistance meaningless. It is both mirror and medicine. You see your own contradictions reflected with such compassion that they lose their sharpness. You are not trying to fix yourself anymore. You are learning to be whole. You see that even the broken pieces were necessary to make the sound complete. The outer world still moves as it always has, but your relationship to it changes. You no longer seek meaning in its noise. You bring meaning to it through your stillness. Silence becomes your anchor. You speak more softly, you listen more deeply, and every gesture carries intention. You are not trying to be spiritual. You are simply remembering your natural state. The silence has become your teacher, your lover, your mirror. And now it begins to show you what lies beyond even itself. Beyond silence, there is something even deeper. It cannot be named, yet it feels closer than your own heartbeat. It is the awareness that watches, even silence itself. You begin to sense that the one who listens and the silence being listened to are the same. There is no observer and observed. There is only one movement, one consciousness, one unbroken field. You realize that silence was only the doorway, not the destination. What lies beyond is pure presence. In this presence, fear dissolves completely. There is nothing left to protect, nothing to prove. You feel yourself expanding in all directions, and yet there is no center. The mind, once restless and full of questions, becomes transparent. You no longer need to understand. You are understanding itself. Jung called this union with the self, the realization of totality. But here, in this stillness, there are no concepts left, only the living reality of being. The images that once guided you now fade into light. The forest, the river, the fire, they do not disappear, they merge into essence. You feel them inside you as qualities rather than forms. The forest becomes depth, the river becomes flow, the fire becomes awareness. Everything you once saw as external symbols now reveals itself as expressions of your own consciousness. Silence has fulfilled its task. It has returned you to unity. You look at the world and see no separation. The same silence that breathes in your chest moves through every leaf, every cloud, every person you meet. Even noise becomes part of it. The traffic outside, the laughter, the rain against the window, all are notes within the same endless symphony. The difference between sacred and ordinary disappears. Life itself becomes a meditation. You are no longer searching for meaning. You are meaning taking form. And yet, even here, humility remains. You understand that the journey never truly ends. Silence continues to deepen, revealing new layers of awareness, new dimensions of being. The mystery does not shrink as you approach it. It expands. You realize that enlightenment is not an escape from the world, but an intimacy with it. To live in silence is to live awake, to listen to the voice that never stops speaking through all things. And now that voice speaks through you. The silence inside you has become vast now, like a horizon without end. It no longer feels like something you enter, but something that breathes through everything you touch. When you move, it moves. When you speak, it listens. When you fall quiet, it sings. There is no separation anymore between your awareness and life itself. You begin to understand that this stillness is not a retreat from the world, but the pulse that sustains it. Every atom hums with the same invisible sound. As the mind softens completely, you begin to feel how the silence carries love within it. Not the kind that clings or desires, but the love that simply is. It radiates through your presence, wordless and steady, like sunlight filtering through a temple. You feel it in your breath, in the rhythm of your heart, in the warmth of your skin. You realize that love and silence are not two things. They are the same energy expressed through stillness. The world around you seems transformed, and yet nothing has changed, only your eyes. You see the same streets, the same faces, the same sky, but everything glows with significance. Even pain feels sacred because it too arises from the same source. You begin to understand that the task of being human was never to escape the noise, but to listen deeply enough to hear silence within it. Every sound, every experience, every life is part of the same unfolding song. You start to move through your days with a quiet grace. The small things matter again. The sound of rain becomes a prayer. The sight of a stranger becomes a reflection. You no longer live through reaction, but through response. Silence has taught you the art of presence. It has shown you that the world does not need fixing, only witnessing. To witness is to love, and to love is to remember what you are. In that remembrance, you find peace. And as you stand now, within this boundless quiet, you sense that you have not reached the end of the journey, but its true beginning. The self has awakened within the human form, and the human has become transparent to the divine. The river returns to the ocean, yet the ocean flows through the river. You no longer ask where silence leads, because you have become its voice. You are the pause between thoughts, the breath between worlds, the living proof that when silence speaks, creation listens. Now, the silence that once frightened you feels like home. It no longer demands your surrender, it welcomes your return. You breathe into it, as into the heart of an old friend. You understand that nothing has been lost in this journey. Every sound, every word, every heartbeat was part of the same great rhythm, guiding you back to yourself. What was once a question has become presence. What was once a void has become fullness. Silence no longer hides meaning. Silence is the meaning. You begin to live as though each moment were sacred. The ordinary becomes divine, simply because you are awake within it. You listen to people without waiting to reply. You walk without hurry. You speak only when words are born from stillness. And when you look at the world, you see it breathing the same quiet pulse that moves through you. You realize that silence was never the end of thought. It was the beginning of understanding. At night, when everything falls quiet, you close your eyes and feel the echo of that inner voice that has guided you here. It speaks without sound, but you know its tone by heart. It tells you that the journey inward is not a retreat from life, but a deeper participation in it. You feel the presence of Jung there, not as a man of ideas, but as a soul who understood this same truth. The self is not found by speaking louder, but by listening deeper. And so you listen to the breath, to the stillness between thoughts, to the soft hum of existence that never stops. You understand now that silence is not the absence of life. It is life in its purest form. It is the bridge between the seen and the unseen, the sound of eternity passing through the human heart. You are not separate from it. You are its expression, its language, its continuation. And as you rest within that realization, the world feels lighter. The mind feels clear. The soul feels whole. There are no more questions to chase, no more noise to silence. Only awareness, breathing through awareness, endlessly returning to itself. You smile, perhaps without reason, and let the quiet speak once more. It says nothing, yet somehow you hear everything.